He moved to India a few years ago, and now Mr. Vembu is the founder and the CEO of Zoho Corporation, which is one of the largest subscription businesses, netting $1 billion in annual revenue. Zoho is a homegrown technology powerhouse. Mr. Sridhar Vembu, without doubt, is a key architect of India's technological transformation, and it gives me immense pleasure in inviting him on stage for a talk on how new entrepreneurs think. Mr. Vembu.
Vanakkam. Namaskaram. Hope everybody can hear me here. So I am the one standing between you and lunch, so I'm very aware of it. I'll try to keep it reasonably brief. First of all, Arnab, thanks for having me here. It's a really privilege to be here. And I'm also following many illustrious speakers here. In particular, I actually noted down several points from Mr. Uday Kotak, what he said, in particular what he said about current account surplus, how India has been running deficits for the last 25, 30, 40 years, particularly deficit with China, how we move from the deficit to surplus. That means we are able to export more than we import. And what does it take to do this? And that is actually a passionate topic. If you've seen me on Twitter, a lot of these platforms, that's what I spend a lot of time on. In fact, our company, Zoho itself, is built on building up those capabilities so that we can be in the world markets and win in the world markets. So that has been the primary goal for our company. So I'll share some of those lessons and what are the challenges in getting there. And after, maybe in 20, 25 years, when we get there, what kind of society, what we want to be. So those would be the topics I'll try to talk about. First, if you look at the journey so far, the last 25 years, we have gone from approximately 350, 400 billion GDP to now 3.5, so almost a 10x, maybe 8 or 9x GDP growth. If we project this forward the next 25 years, we could be a 30, 35 trillion economy. That would be one of the world's largest. We definitely can get there. We have the talent pool. We have all the stars are aligned for us, geopolitically, strategically, all of it. But how do we get there? What are the steps? See, I'm a software person. I think in algorithms. How do we do this? What are the steps? What is step one? Step two? The computer has to understand, right? So that's how I think. In other words, whenever I think of a grand goal, what are the steps? What is the first step we'll do? What is the second step we'll do? That's what we do still with products. So how do we get to that tenfold, and what are the challenges in getting there? And this is where I often highlight in my presentations the critical part between a low-income economy and a very high-income economy today. And if you don't have resources, so leave out the countries that have abundant natural resources that they export. That I'll exclude because those don't have much to teach us. I'm looking at a country like Japan or a South Korea or a Taiwan. And those countries, those are the examples we have to look at because they don't export anything other than what they make from resources they often actually import. And so they add value through their own brains, their own labor, their own people. Those are the economies we have to look at. And what do we find in this? There is a distinct line between, for example, a Taiwan and South Korea versus the Philippines, even a Malaysia. And we have to understand this. What exactly is the difference? And the difference is growth in technology capabilities. For example, this is exemplified by a company like Samsung or a Hyundai. These are Korean companies. How they have grown from providing relatively low value-added products, say 25 years ago. Most of us will remember Hyundai cars, their reputation, say 25 years ago. But what they are today, and how Samsung has evolved to be a world leader, global leader in the last 25 years, 30 years. And this is the transformation of South Korean economy itself. How South Korea evolved from a middle income to lower to middle income economy to one of the most developed nations in the world. That transformation ultimately comes down to those focused, organized acquisition of capabilities. Capabilities in 100, maybe 1,000 critical sectors. Every area, that is not just software and AI, it is semiconductors, it's in chips, it's in material science, it's in metallurgy, to all of it. Metallurgy, I mentioned as an example. South Korea has an edge over us in steel, as an example. And they make more specialized steels than we do. This is something we must be aware of. They don't just make more semiconductors, better semiconductors, all of that. They also make better steel than us. Even though we have a very large steel industry, they still make better steel than us. So these are the challenges that we have to surmount. How do we understand, how do we go from here, from our current capabilities, make that tenfold leap? And this is not merely a quantitative leap. In other words, we are not just going to do 10 times more of everything. It has to be a qualitative leap. And that qualitative leap has to come from building of technology capabilities. And that has to come from investment in R&D. This is the primary thing that I want to keep pushing our entrepreneurs everywhere. Invest in R&D, invest in R&D, invest in R&D. There's only one point agenda. If you look at our industry broadly, our overall, we spend as little as maybe 1 or 2% of GDP in commercial R&D. I'm not talking about academic R&D. I'm not talking about, when I say R&D, I'm not talking about the stuff that wins Nobel Prizes. I'm talking about the stuff that improves your product a little bit first. And every year that little bit. And that Japanese style, that accumulation of that little bit over 10, 15 years gets you to world class. That is what I'm talking about. And that is the stuff that we are not investing in enough today. Our industry is investing maybe 1 or 2%. We have to raise it to 5 to 10%. This is something, if you look at South Korean history, they pushed this very, very hard on their industry early on. Starting in the 70s to 80s, they pushed their industry to invest in R&D. The government not only incentivized it, pushed product, kept asking, why aren't we better than the Japanese? For them, the role model was Japan. The South Korean government will push their industry, why aren't we better than Japan in this? Why aren't we better than them in metals or in semiconductors, on cars? All of these areas. And at that time when they were asking these questions, these are outlandish. The thought that in 1985 South Korea could catch up with Japan did not seem even probable at that point. But they kept at it, year after year of R&D investment. Today Samsung has actually overtaken companies like Sony in capabilities, which 25 or 30 years ago was unthinkable. And we are seeing a very similar transformation in China, where their capabilities in sector after sector are advancing very rapidly. We are seeing companies like Huawei or Haier. All of these companies are now tremendous explosion in their capabilities. And this is exactly what we need to be investing in our industry. Across the spectrum, across about 1,000 critical technologies, I'm going to say. And we can identify those technologies. It's possible, we know this from sensors, from advanced cameras, sensing equipment, to drones, you name it, avionics. I can name 100 myself. We are investing maybe in 10 of them ourselves now in Zoho right now. But that's what one company can do. But we need a focused national effort to catch up in these 1,000 technologies. Why do I think it's possible to do it? Well, our own experience. I have talent, 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds in rural Tenkasi district, absolutely a rural backwaters district. No, nothing at all special about this in any way. Just like any other rural district in India, who are building very advanced compiler technology for us. State-of-the-art compiler technology done in some very remote outpost by students coming from the same district mostly coming from government schools. So this talent exists in our nation. It is there everywhere. We just have to have that focused national effort. This is the exact type of talent the South Koreans, and originally the Japanese, then the South Koreans, later the Taiwanese, and then the Chinese, they leveraged. It's not like South Korea imported experts from the US or UK. They built it up. And we could build this up. We could build this up in our nation, in our rural areas. And that is when I talk about 1,000 critical areas, we happen to have about 833 districts. Most of them are rural still. So we can actually think of it as, our Prime Minister talks about one district, one product. I would enhance it with one district, one R&D activity. One area in which we must be a global leader in that district. And it's very possible. For example, in Tenkasi, we are now building up a capability to build compiler technology. Compilers are the core piece of the software that compiles software into machine code. And this technology is vital. You will never see a compiler, but that's behind all of the software you use. And that actually brings up a very important point. I have studied industry quite a bit. For example, what makes Japanese industry special? Why is Japan still able to compete with the world with $50,000, $60,000 per capita GDP, labor costs one of the highest in the world? Why are they able to compete with? Why are they able to sell machines to Bangladesh? Well, how are they able to do it? Why is Switzerland able to compete? Why is Germany able to compete? And this question arose because I was in Tirupur, our textile belt, which is a leader in textile exports from India. And the businessmen were saying, well, we are losing competitiveness. I asked why. Well, our labor costs have gone up so much now. It's now, we pay a tailor maybe 20,000 rupees a month, often 25,000 rupees, or sometimes even more if it's a highly skilled person. Bangladesh has the same machines, and they pay me 7,000, 8,000 rupees. And then there are countries coming up in Africa which are, their equivalent salaries are now 4,000, 3,000 rupees. How do we compete? They asked. So I asked the business people, so what machines do you buy? Who do you buy these machines from? Well, Switzerland and Germany. I said, so now you got your competition. Your competition is not Bangladesh. It's not Kenya. It is actually Switzerland. It is Germany. Your labor costs have gone up so much. Now you should be looking up, who do we compete? Not look down on who is stealing my jobs. So this is the message I gave in Tirupur, and people got it. And I said, so many engineering colleges are there in this very region. That Kongu region near Coimbatore, Tirupur is one of the most prosperous regions in all of India. You will visibly see prosperity there. You will see, if you want to see what all of India will look like in 10, 15 years, you can actually visit the Coimbatore belt, you will see the prosperity. For example, I joke that you don't have tea shops. They have all become fancy bakeries now. You will see it in rural areas in Coimbatore. And yet, they face the challenge now of course, the labor costs have caught up with them. They pay some of the highest wages in the country now, and now they have to learn to compete. I said, you have engineering colleges, maybe you have 100 engineering colleges in the region. Now you have to use the talent to now figure out how to compete with Taiwan, with Switzerland, with Germany. And those machines in your factories, you have to figure out how to make those machines. Because that's where the leverage is for you. Not in competing on labor costs with Bangladesh, because that's not where your future is. And this is something that is true across our whole country, because it's not just the regional competitiveness here, it is also our national competitiveness, national strength. Because when we have those capabilities, we won't get lectured on stupid stuff, right? When a bank fails in the US, nobody bothers to lecture them, right? On how they should be running their financial systems. Then why do we get lectured? Don't we know how to run our country? Do they have to come and tell us how to run? That comes because of our lack of capabilities. The fact that we still depend on them for technology. The only way we actually become truly sovereign, truly independent, truly a strength, power in the world, is when we have those capabilities here. And that has to be our national mission, acquisition of those capabilities across a broad spectrum of industry. Pretty much every area of life that we depend on these technologies on, which is everything from your smartphones to our air conditioners. The compressor technology, for example, in the AC, the compressor technology is very critical. The motors that power all our electrical devices now. And the leading motor company in the world, for example, it's Japanese. That's a $6 billion company. Why don't we have that type of technology here? Those are the questions we must keep asking. And now I've outlined sort of first, how do we catch up? Investment in R&D, focused R&D in critical technologies. That has to be done by our private sector with government bodies, our research labs, all that participating in it. So it has to be a private-public cooperation, but the private sector must lead the way, must invest. We at Zoho are investing maybe about 30-40% of our revenue in R&D right now. We have one of the highest R&D density in the world right now, because I just see a problem, I go and invest people and invest resources in it right now. Most of our profit is going into R&D, flowed back into R&D. Then the next thing that happens, and this is something that is a much more subtle problem, South Korea runs a trade surplus. South Korea is highly competitive. China runs a massive surplus. But you read the headlines, South Korea has an unemployment problem for its youth. And they have a dwindling population, one of the lowest birth rates in the world, and they have trouble for jobs for young people, well-paying jobs for young people. This is something, and same thing in China, you will see it. You will see headlines about China's employment market, and you will see the same headlines. Why do these countries run such massive surpluses? They are able to export, they are globally competitive, then why aren't they able to help their own young people? And why do they have such low birth rates? This has to be figured out, and again, I believe the answers have to come from India. This is where I believe once we catch up, as we catch up, our model of development will become a model for the world. We have to be the Vishwa Guru, because these are problems that nobody has figured out yet. No economist in the world can tell you why South Korea has this problem. How can they run such a massive surplus, and why do they then have an unemployment problem, underemployment problem among their youth? And why do, for example, they have such a low birth rate, population almost shrinking, and yet have such high real estate prices in Seoul? These are problems that the economists haven't figured out really at all. And this actually goes deeper into our own future, because we already see India is now a country of many, many sub-layers, right? We already see some of these problems in Bangalore and in Chennai, all those. You go to richer apartment complexes, there are no kids at all. Zero. In fact, our birth rate within Zoho, I joke, would be South Korean. Maybe 0.9, right? Per woman now. That's where Zoho's birth rate will be. But Zoho is already reaching the advanced country birth rate, where people come, they don't have children. They stop having children. You make money, you stop having children. And why does this happen? They will cite cost of living, and they will cite, how much apartments cost now, 50 lakhs, 1 crore, 1.5 crores, all that. They will cite school expenses, all of that. And then the work pressures, all of that. Because if we have to compete and catch up with the rest of the world, we have to work hard. And where is the time for children, right? So these are some of the problems that we have to figure out. And part of the reason I moved to a rural India is to also think hard about this and figure out a holistic pattern. And what do I mean by holistic pattern? Well, no nation, nobody has really figured out how to combine prosperity with contentment. When is it enough? What is enough? Clearly, we cannot keep importing, we have to export more. But what is enough prosperity? And how do we combine rural and urban? How do we combine growth with equity? How do we, for example, South Korea is really failing its young people today because the income that they are earning is not reaching to the average young person in South Korea. You can see this visibly. You can see this. Hong Kong had riots for the same reason. Hong Kong is prosperous, but Hong Kong's young people don't feel prosperous. And it's the same thing in South Korea. And these are the problems that we have to address. And I'm actually confident that we will address them, because our political system, our systems are much more flexible. I believe we learn lessons faster here. And then we have our own vastness, our very distributed nature confers an advantage in experimenting to find solutions. What works? For example, the kind of R&D we are doing in rural India, it is something only possible in India. We have a stable geopolitics, very secure. For example, my mentor Gurumurthy ji often points out what a low ratio of police to population we have. Like in my village, I never see a policeman. There is one police station for about 40, 50 villages there, and there may be 10 police people there. You hardly ever see them. People keep the peace. Our own people maintain the peace. This is only possible in India. And this is a fundamental strength, a civilizational strength. That is why that kind of R&D is actually possible. The fact that we are investing in R&D there requires a stable social setting around. Law and order, as we say. And that's possible in rural India today. Much of rural India, wherever I go, it's true. I feel safe. I traveled around rural UP about 3 months ago into districts like Sonbhadra. I found the same thing. There won't be many police officers anywhere, but you are safe. You are generally safe. And this is important for R&D investment to go. And that also has, and as I mentioned, the growth with equity. That we have to now, along with our growth, we also have to ensure that the fruits of growth reach all segments of our society, particularly also reach our younger people so that they don't feel that I don't have opportunities. And across districts, all of our districts, so that is the real challenge for us. And I believe we can figure this out. So the first is the investment in R&D. And one thing about R&D, I tell you, the compiler research we are doing, it does not make 5,000 people. It takes about 30, 40 people. These kinds of critical R&D, if you want to do very intricate metallurgy work, that may be a 20%, 30%, maybe a 50% R&D center. Any such R&D subfield is not thousands of jobs, maybe 20, 30. You accumulate them together, like a Bell Labs, the original AT&T Bell Labs in the US, you're going to have a few thousand people, 10,000 people. It's still going to be small in numbers. But the impact of that is humongous. When we get that compiler technology, we will have a lot more leverage in how we build software. We can do it much faster, all of it. And that, then the next step is, well, we raise our productivity through automation. Do the fruits flow to everyone? This question is not purely an industrial question, it's not an economic question, it is a political economy question. And that's where our value systems, our spirituality, all that come into play. And this is why part of what Zoho is doing now, we are adopting like villages, we are setting up schools, all of it because our own prosperity, our own productivity, I feel has to flow into our society, particularly to our rural society. This is, I submit to you the second part of that answer, where what do we do as we develop? And finally, the environment. And this is the most critical of all. All of this won't matter if we fry ourselves to death. If average temperatures reach 50 degrees C, then we are screwed. So we have to figure out all of the answers while also saving our planet. And truly, you see the headlines, you see the heat, even in my corner of India where last few weeks have been very, very hot, extremely hot. And I live without air conditioning. So you can imagine the pain a little bit. But these are also important questions, which means that the prosperity with contentment. Are we burning up our planet in the quest to be prosperous? That also, I believe, our own spiritual heritage, combining humility and contentment, is critical for this. In other words, we are not just here as $30 trillion GDP, we also have to offer solutions to the world. So with that, I'll stop this. Thank you very much. Thank you for the time. Namaskaram. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sridhar.
Jamra, I just wanted to sum up this session by saying a few words about this great visionary. We often think about what India will be and what we can do in the future. Now, behind this extremely humble man, Sridhar Vembu, is a visionary who is presently, not in the future. He has led a company whose annual revenues are over $1 billion. And not in the future, ladies and gentlemen, not 20 years from now. Today, he is our homegrown competitor to Google, Microsoft, and Salesforce. Third fact, sir, because you are so humble, you will not talk about it. A man who invests 30 to 40% of $1 billion purely into R&D is, I think, absolutely a man committed to this country. And you said something, sir, which is why this session is very inspiring for me. You said something 10 years back. 10 years back, he said, Sridhar Vembu said, they buy, talking about the West. You remember, sir? Yeah. The first time I'm physically meeting him, I've read him, I've studied him, I've analyzed his model. He says they buy companies to become big. So Google will buy 10 companies to become bigger. He said they buy. We build. And this man today, absolute tech evangelist, is building some of the most competitive products which in a few years will take Zoho global, sir. So all the power to you. And
thank you.
Can you believe it, viewers? He is doing all of this while cycling around in a village in Tenkasi. He runs this whole multi-billion-dollar company from a village. I think you are, sir, a role model.
But I do have a 300 megabit per second fiber connection.
Yes.
That is critical.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's true. That also talks about. So I'm very happy to meet you.
Thank you.
And I think that what you've said today tells us that you can do business in an Indian style. And not that we are going to transform. Sir, you are transforming India.
Thank you.
I thank you very much. We're blessed to have you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arnab and Mr. Vembu. You'll agree, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a phenomenal lineup of speakers so far. We've had the biggest names in the military, the field of politics and business. They've all given us a lot to ponder about. We are more convinced now that the time of transformation is now. And it's time now that we take a break. Please move to Shah Jahan for lunch and return in about 40 minutes or 30 minutes. We'll be ready with our session at 3 o'clock.